Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on running a cyber crisis drill from the US government, Homeland Security, and Tabletops for enterprise board members. Today, we have Dan Lohrmann and Bikash Barai with us as speakers. A little bit about the speakers. Dan is presently the CSO and the Chief Strategist at the Security Mentor Inc. He is an internationally recognized cybersecurity leader, technologist, keynote speaker, and author. He has more than 30 years of experience in the computer industry, beginning his career with the National Security Agency. He has worked for 3 years in England as a senior network engineer for Lockheed Martin and for 4 years as a technical director for Mantech International in a United States or UK military facility. Lorman is the author of two books, Virtual Integrity, Faithfully Navigating the Brave New Web, and BYOD for You, the guide to bring your own device to work. He has been a keynote speaker at a global security and technology conference from South Africa to Dubai and Washington, D.C. to Moscow. During his distinguished career, he has served global organizations in the public and private sectors in a variety of executive leadership capacities, receiving numerous national awards, including CSO of the Year. Hello,
Yep.
Bikash, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Yep.
Go ahead, Shital. You're back. Okay, that's part of our life during COVID times.
Exactly.
So Shital might be having some difficulty, but it's okay. We can get started. So, um, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to see you. Let's get started probably with a quick small intro. I'll start a quick intro from my side. I'm Bikash Barai, the host. I am one of the co-founders of FireCompass, as well as I'm one of the co-founders of CISO platform. So Dan, let's start with a quick baseball card kind of intro.
Sure. Dan Lohrmann. I'm Chief Security Officer and Chief Strategist at Security Mentor. So we do security awareness training and former CSO for state of Michigan and started my career at the National Security Agency.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Dan. So probably this is not the most friendly way to start, but let me do it nevertheless.
Go for it.
What had been the most embarrassing moment in your professional life?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking me that question, Bikash. It's great to be with you today. I really enjoyed our conversations preparing for this. And, I would have to go back to 2004. I was the Chief Information Security Officer in Michigan. And so I worked for a woman at the time, Terry Takai was her name, and became very, very famous. She was the CIO for the state of Michigan, so over all technology in Michigan. She went on to become CIO for the state of California, and then after that, CIO for the U.S. Department of Defense. So she was very, very well known in the U.S. and around the world. So Terry, this was our early days, and they say when you're first working for someone, you don't really know them that well, so you kind of have the forming, storming, norming kind of thing, and this was our storming phase. So anyway, one of the early things that happened, this was, I was asked, our security team, I ran a security team of around 30 professionals, and we were asked to put wireless networks in all of the conference rooms in state government. And so at that time, that was kind of a cutting edge issue. Now, everyone has wireless everywhere in their homes and in coffee shops and everything. But the reality is, that was a cutting edge thing at the time. And my background was, National Security Agency, and we call it 3-letter agencies in Washington. So NSA, CIA, DIA, FBI, and I had done my homework, and I knew that this was bad. Security, we couldn't allow Wi-Fi in conference rooms because it was going to be a problem. It was it was not secure. And there were stories in the papers, lots of stories in the US papers about people pulling into Home Depot and Walmart, not Walmart, but Home Depot and Lowe's and different parking lots or car parks and hacking into cash register because the Wi-Fi's weren't secure. So I had all these papers. So basically, Terry asked me to prepare. We were in the staff meeting, and it was like 10 of us in the staff meeting, and we got to that agenda item, and Terry says, Dan, tell us how we're going to securely put Wi-Fi in all of our government conference rooms. And I said, well, Terry, I've decided to cancel this project. We're not going to do it. We're not putting Wi-Fi in any of the conference rooms. And Terry just looked at me with this stunned look, and I have, she asked everyone to leave the conference room but me. So it was just me and Terry looking at each other. And I've never seen a government agency meeting end so quickly in my life, because, this was an hour-long meeting. It was 15 minutes in, and she just ended it. And she looked me in the eye and she said, Dan, if that's your answer, you cannot be the CISO in the state of Michigan. Basically, I was worried I was going to get fired. And I said, well, wait a minute, Terry, you don't understand. Let me explain. I had all these white papers and all this, I was going to show her all my background materials about and articles and books about why this was a bad idea. And she says, no, stop. I read all those articles. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're thinking. But she said, I've been to Dow, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. They all have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. What do they know that you don't know? And so they're like, so I'm like, whoa. She says, I'm giving you 1 week to figure this out and come back and give us a plan, not to deliver it, but to give us the plan to do it securely, or you're fired. So that was a real scary moment for me, Bikash. It was scary. I almost thought I was going to lose my job. I ran back to my team.
That's an interesting try. Yeah.
I just one more quick thing I'll tell you. I went back to my team. They were like, did we tell them we're canceling Wi-Fi? And I said, no, we're doing Wi-Fi. We've got to figure this out. So 2 years later, we actually win the award for top Wi-Fi security in the whole country. But that really was a paradigm shift for me as a person. That security needs to be enabling. They need to be coming with solutions and not just problems. Security pros can't just say, no, can't do it. You've got to come up with a solution that's going to do security on time, on budget, with the right level of security. So that's my most embarrassing story, how I almost got fired, but it turned into a good thing. Terry and I are still friends 20 years later, actually, well, 18 years later. And now, Bikash, I want to know what your most embarrassing moment in your career was.
Sure. I would be happy to. But before that, did you manage to get fired? No.
No, I didn't. I kept my job.
But you tried.
I kept
You
my
tried,
job.
honestly.
I did not get fired, and it ended up being a paradigm shift for me, because I started to think about security differently. And whenever I had a security challenge, it's like, who's doing this best? Who can we learn from? Look around. And state government is not known at that time, certainly, as one of the leaders in security. And like I said, the private sector was doing that better than us. And we learned from that, and we actually improved. We actually got better through that experience.
Interesting. Very interesting learning. I believe that there's a lot of interesting takeaway as well, outside of a very entertaining story for sure. So let me share mine.
Yes,
So
please.
this is quite a long time back, huh? So almost like a couple of decades back. And as a kind of little bit prelude to the story, which is important, I used to do a lot of magic shows. I mean, long time back. And by magic shows, I don't mean the rabbit out of the hat trick kind of magic shows, but more like the David Blaine kind of stuff, mentalism and close-up magic and those kind of stuff. I used to do on stage as well. So I was doing like opening shows for college fests and closing shows for college fests. So I was doing it at a pretty decent level. So and also I started my first startup around that period. We were doing this automated penetration testing on the cloud. So that was what we were working on. So now I went for a visit to Paris to meet some partners, and that was like a slightly gloomy day and little bit of drizzles. And I remember I was walking down the stairs of they call it subway, right?
Yeah, subway. Yeah.
Like the underground. Yeah, they call it subway.
Yeah.
So or no, they call it metro.
Oh, the metro.
I
Yeah.
guess the metro. Yeah, yeah. They call it the metro, the underground transport system. So
In the U.S.,
I was,
it's the subway.
yeah, US is the subway and London is the underground.
Yeah.
So I was going down the stairs, and there was a guy who looked like from East Europe. He came and told me that I'd like to sell this iPhone. iPhone just got launched, and would you like to buy? And I was the BlackBerry guy during those days.
Yeah.
So I said, no, I'm happy with my phone. So I was walking down, and this guy still followed me and said, you know what, I need some money badly, and my sister is at the hospital. I need some money. It'll be great help if you could buy this. And he eventually came down, like he started with somewhere around few €100 and came down to some 20 euros. And eventually he told me, you know what, I need it very, very badly. Can you give it to me? I mean, I'll give it to you at 10 euros or something like that. And here's the iPhone, and I'm also going to give you this camera, a small point and shoot automatic camera. And I took that phone and I swiped, and everything was working fine. And I thought, this is interesting, because at 10 euros, if you get a device which is working, in worst case, even if things are not perfect, we can go open it up and look into and use it for hacking. So
Sure.
I found that, and I think I became a little bit greedy. I wouldn't say I tried to help that guy, but I said, okay, here you go. I gave the 10 euros. He took this iPhone and the camera, put it into a small brown bag and gave it to me. And I took that, and he started running up the stairs. And I opened this brown bag, and inside that, there were 2 potatoes.
Oh, wow.
So right in front of me, he did the classic switch, which I was pretty well trained to do. He did
Wow.
that classic switch in front of me, and that was probably the most expensive pair of potatoes I have still, I've bought till date.
That's a great
So that
story.
had been a pretty humbling experience, being a security professional. I mean, that reminds me to stay humble.
That's great.
Great.
Great story.
So Dan, let's get started with some real crisis example. Today's topic is handling crisis. Please share some examples of some real crises that you dealt with in the past.
Well, I've dealt with lots of them. You know, when I was CSO, for sure, one of the biggest ones was the blackout, the Northeast blackout of 2003. So, you know, we had just gone through the whole Y2K, and I started in Michigan government in '97, and you know, I'd come from an NSA kind of top secret background, you know, and Michigan government was very different than that, of course. Not a lot of very secure facilities, but the whole focus during those years from '97 to 2000 was Y2K. So we had prepared, you know, what if, you know, all the computers break, and we had done a lot of good work to prepare for that. And that went kind of without a hitch, but we were all sitting there in the emergency center, you know, on January or actually, you know, December 31st, January 1st of 2000. But then 3 years later, you know, we had of course 2 years later we had 9/11, but not so much happened in Michigan. But 2 years after that, we had a large blackout in Michigan where the whole Northeast lost power for 2 days. Basically, we lost power, and it was basically a situation where you know, we had to all go to the emergency coordination center and respond to you know, no computers, no power, no you know, huge issues. A lot of people thought it was in the US thought it was another 9/11. They thought, you know, it was another terrorist attack. And all the people in the emergency coordination center, we were there for 4 straight days in a bunker with, you know, a generator. And responding to all kinds of issues. That, you know, the state, parts of the state came back like 24 hours later. Other parts came back more like 2 days later, and some came back 3 days later. But it was a major emergency, and New York was without power for a couple of days. A lot of things happened, you know, trying to get water from one side of the state to the other. Some things you wouldn't necessarily think about, like it was a very hot day. It was like 95 degrees Fahrenheit in the U.S. And restaurants were having to close. There was no air conditioning, but they were serving spoiled food. And so like there were food, inspectors who were having to, you know, close restaurants because people were eating spoiled food in Detroit. And they needed the technology to support that, but they had no power. So there was lots of things we had to do. And during that time, I met tons of people who ended up becoming leaders in Michigan government over the next decade. The person I worked closely with was Colonel Etchew, who was running the whole emergency for state police in Michigan. She ended up becoming the director of Michigan State Police. So in those kind of emergencies, if you're ready, if you're prepared, if you've got good plans in place, it can really strengthen your security organization to be prepared. That was not a hacking attack, although some people thought it was a hacking attack initially. But you know, we responded to that, and that was a real life emergency we responded to.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So, I mean, that happened due to more like a natural calamity, but that's something which I think all the nations today want to stay prepared for, right? So, Dan, let's talk about some of the drills that you have done, and so any of these large-scale cyber crisis drills that you conducted in the government.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the ones that I want to mention was a series of drills that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security does called Cyberstorm. That's C-Y-B-E-R Storm, S-T-O-R-M. And the one I'll tell you about, the story I'm going to tell you is from Cyberstorm 1, which was the first one. But they're now up to, I think, Cyberstorm 7 is coming. They do this every 2 years. And these are global exercises. So, you know, they do them in, you know, U.S. states. They use federal agencies in the U.S., but I know the United Kingdom and France and Australia and New Zealand were all part of these exercises. So this was a global exercise. We were at the first one, and my team had prepared. This is a week-long exercise. It was not everyone on our team, obviously, but it was a large group of people. And I tell people, if you want to understand what Cyberstorm 1 was like, I'm thinking this is back in 2006. So this is going back to the first Cyberstorm, but there's a lot of really good lessons we learned from that. Watch the movie Die Hard 4 with Bruce Willis. It's called Live Free and Die Hard, where all the power goes out and bombs are going off, and it's scary stuff. So we had a situation where the first day of this exercise, you know, it was probably over the top, and most cyber exercises today wouldn't start this way, but they had bombs going off, kind of like 9/11 again. They blew up our data center. They blew up big parts of government. They hacked other parts of government, and all of our services were down for 2 days. And it was very, very intense. And we were like getting beat up. We were like humbled. Our team was just like, we were like done. I mean, we were really kind of overwhelmed. By Thursday afternoon, though, this is what I want to tell you about. By Thursday afternoon, we were told there's one more thing you have to do in this exercise to train your team. And we said, okay, what is that? They said, we have to get our Bull mainframe, Bull, B-U-L-L, Bull mainframe, which was, you know, that I don't know if they're even in business anymore, but back then they were a big mainframe shop. We need to get it back online so that we can pay the employees, because all of our services are down and we need to get a Bull mainframe. But our two Bull mainframes, our main mainframe and our backup, were gone. One was blown up, the other one was hacked and unusable. So we had to get a new one. So they said to us, we need you to contact Bull headquarters in Paris, in France, and get a Bull mainframe as soon as possible. So we're like, well, how do we do that? Well, in the instructions in this, you know, it's all scenarios based, right? These are scenarios. And this was obviously didn't really happen. This is a scenario. Pick up the red phone and call Bull. So we picked up this phone and we're calling them, and the person on the other end's got this thick French accent. And I don't want to try and imitate a French accent, but the guy is talking to us. Yes, what is it? What do you need? And I'm like, we need a Bull mainframe. And they're like, we have one left. And like, great, one left. Awesome. We want to buy it right now. And we know what it costs. It's worth about $12 million. We'll give you $12 million for this bull mainframe. And they said, well, we want, there was silence, and they said, we want $45 million. And we're like, wait a minute, $45 million? We know it's only worth $12 million. They're like, no, this is the last one. We have 4 other customers that want this bull mainframe. We want $45 million. This was in 2006. And I remember putting my hand over the phone and telling everybody, they want $45 million. And everyone in the room was like all upset. You know, this big room full of people and computers, and we're all, responding. And so we negotiated with them for the next 10 minutes. We ended up deciding like $23 million. We negotiated, we bought it. And this was all, a fictional exercise, right? Well, this is where it gets interesting, Bikash. So the next day, at the end of the exercise, there's always what we call a hot wash. A hot wash is where you go through the activities of the week. What went well, what went wrong, what could you do better, what did you learn, what were lessons learned, how can you prepare in the future based on these scenarios that happen. And one person raised their hand in the middle of this and said, we're saying, like, what do you think did not go well, and what was like unreasonable? And one of our experts, who became a very, well, I'm not going to name the person but it became a global CSO, very, very famous now, person, does cyber all over the world, said, Dan, that whole thing with the bull mainframe, that would never happen. No one would ever extort money using cybersecurity. This was, and somebody yelled, yeah, it was kind of like we were being held for ransom. And somebody else said, yeah, ransomware, almost mocking, like laughing about this. This could never happen. This is a pipe dream. It's just never, we're going to drive, we'll take a plane to Pluto or something. This is just far-fetched. The funny thing was, Bikash, we look back at that now and we see ransomware became like the #1 story in cyber like threats. It became in 2019 for sure, but even back in 2013, it started getting big. 2014, 2015, 2019, I think it was, for me, it was the top story in state and local governments in the USA. 2020, they say it doubled last year, 100%, and now it's going to even be worse in 2021. So my point is this: that whole exercise, Homeland Security thought of that 7 years before ransomware even became very big. And then even 15 years before it's like the #1 story. So my message to the people listening and to people watching us is, you can learn a lot in these scenarios. You can think through things and even think through what might come next. And who knows, you may even be predicting what's going to happen 5 years from now in cybersecurity, because the bad guys are always looking for new ways to get into our networks, new ways to make money, new ways to extort money. And so we saw that way before ransomware became popular.
Great, that's very interesting, Dan. So Dan, let's consider a scenario like this, that suppose we have to do a tabletop exercise.
Sure.
For an enterprise. Can you give a kind of playbook for conducting tabletop cyber crisis drill? So we can start with who are the folks who should be in the room, how long should it be, what should be the structure, what are some best practices, what are some do's and don'ts. So building a kind of high-level structured framework for conducting a cyber crisis drill for enterprise. How would you approach that?
Great question. Yeah, so I've been a part of many of those, both within government and now in the private sector, working with in the U.S. It's with InfraGard, with federal agencies, with U.S. State agencies and others. So first of all, obviously there are different types of tabletops. I'm going to talk about one that really, for example, in Michigan would be a whole of government approach, which really needs to involve the top executive. So whether it's government, but whether it's the private sector, like you said, if it's a large enterprise, you need to really have the decision makers, the board members, and or the top, if you're in agencies, if you have different departments, those big decision makers need to be there, because they need to really understand, what happens when you have a ransomware attack, what happens when you have, you're hacked or you have a data breach. What are the steps you need to go through? So the first thing I would say is, around that table at a high level, you need to have the business executives included. So you need to have elements of legal. You need to have elements of financial, your CFO. You need to have, obviously, in government, we have police, the people who are enforcers, the security team, the people that are actually going to be implementing this from a technology perspective. So CIOs, chief information officers, also, different types of experts in business area. So whatever, who knows which area might be hit. Last year, the biggest area in the US was hospitals. So if this was a hospital tabletop, the scenarios for doctors might be slightly different than it might be for a government. Or if it's for a bank, it could be different. What are the different functions? Maybe it hits one part of the bank and maybe not another part of the bank. So you want to make sure those leadership roles from all across the enterprise are there at the table. And that's really important, getting them involved. The other thing is you want to make sure that as you're putting together your scenarios, and I would just recommend, go to, in the USA, I don't know, other parts of the world as well. I know the UK and USA very well, but NIST is a great place to go. National Institute of Standards and Technology, a great resource. I will just tell people, we're not using slides today, but the CSRC, Computer Security Resource Center, csrc.nist.gov is a great resource, like a library of different types of scenarios and questions you can get in different types of contexts. But there are a wide variety of scenarios. You can bring in third parties to help you build these scenarios, or you can actually find them on the web. A lot of them give away for free that you can use. But you want to make sure you're asking the right kind of questions. You have the right people in the room. And so how long? Bikash, it really depends. I've seen it done in 4 hours. I've seen it done in 8 hours. I've seen it done in 2 hours. I think it's hard to do it in less than 2 hours. Some people can say I can do it in an hour. Well, I mean, some people, I don't know that that's a full functional tabletop. Some people like maybe ask one question at a staff meeting every month or something, but that's not the same. Are we prepared for this? Are we prepared for that? So really thinking through, what would you do business-wise given this scenario? So, asking questions around, what would the technology people be doing? What would the lawyers be doing? What would the legal team be doing? What would the CFO be doing? And so you want to make sure that your scenarios really include all of those key roles and make them as realistic as possible. So obviously you're not going to necessarily be exactly like what your competitors went through recently if they had a ransomware attack, or maybe what another company did. But you can get some very realistic scenarios to say this happened. All of our data was encrypted in a ransomware attack, or for example, how would you provide payment? Would you pay the ransom? Would you not pay the ransom? Do you have cyber insurance? What are the components of cyber insurance that you need to look at, and what is their perspective on this? So, there's a lot of different pieces. Let me stop for a minute and any specific questions you want to ask. I can tell one or two stories of where it actually happened and what happened with cyber insurance and stuff. Some real life stories that might put some flesh on this bones.
Yeah, sure. So Dan, let's discuss a little bit on this. So I was actually kind of driving a similar exercise just a couple of weeks back, and what we did was something like this: that we did the first round of exercise where we set the context. We got all the executives in the room, and we discussed that for this department we now need to decide on this, like the press or the media interaction team, they need to come up with certain kind of responses, right? And then the customer success team needs to come up with certain kind of responses, etc. So what we did was we came up with certain action items. And then we decided that we're going to meet once more and go deep. So what we did was, it was like a prelude to the next exercise, which is where we are going to go deep. So what we kind of did was, instead of doing it in one go, we decided to do it in 2 steps. So Dan, what had been your experience? Like typically, do you suggest like go for like this a single round exercise, or do you think sometimes breaking it into two parts is interesting? Any thoughts on how to make it very effective so that some real stuff come out of it? So our goal had been not just to kind of be mentally prepared, but also to create those responses and to create those templates so that out of that exercise we have some real readiness, apart from the kind of preparedness from the kind of thinking perspective, etc., but get all these things written down. So what's your thought on that in terms of doing it
Yeah.
as a single exercise or breaking it down?
Yeah, most of the times I've seen it done. Again, most of I have been a part of a couple in the private sector. I've been part of more in government and statewide. Like, what if we had a health emergency? We actually, quite frankly, did a bunch of exercises around pandemic prior to COVID, and being prepared. And obviously, there's all kinds of people that need to be involved in that. Even now, there's scenario-based things about what's going to happen with vaccines and all kinds of things related that aren't specifically cyber related. Um, you know, so I've seen it done both ways. I see it more often being done, at least in the U.S. in my experience, as one set of events. Maybe come back 6 months later or a year later and do a different scenario. So it's not healthcare. Maybe now it's transportation. Maybe it's protests in the streets. How are we going to respond to that? So different scenarios, and do that over a series, maybe over one a year. I've seen one a year. I've seen one every 6 months. And usually it's 1 to 2 hours, and then come back, to a different focus on a different set of things the next time around. I have seen it done the way you described as well. An hour here, an hour there, an hour here. I think one of the problems that you have with that, in my experience, sometimes you don't have the continuity. People lose the flow, the urgency, the sense of, if you want to create a sense of urgency and, what are we going to do? And do we have a plan for that? Have we thought about that? I mean, people are supposed to be coming to these tabletops with their plans. It's not like shoot from the hip and, oh my gosh, never thought of that. What are we going to do now? I mean, that's a real problem if that's the case, right? I mean, you want to be coming with your hopefully your teams have thought through these scenarios, and now you're going to be testing your plans. You're testing, and then you're coming out with action items, like you said, Bikash, to actually improve the plans that you have. What would we do if?
Okay.
So one of the things that I've seen, I just want to mention a real life story that's like with ransomware that kind of put some meat to this. We had I'm not going to name the name of the company. We had an organization here, not government. It was a nonprofit in Michigan that was faced with ransomware attack. And it was like let's just say, I'm not going to give you too many details, but the story makes sense as I go through this. Like, it was about a $5 million request. They had encrypted all their data. They had no access to anything. Their backups were encrypted. They had not done a good job of separating their backups, and they hadn't done a good job of, a lot of people have backups, but they don't test the backups. And so the bad actors get in and they actually encrypted the backups as well. So they were kind of, up a creek. They didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay. They had cyber insurance, and in the U.S., the cyber insurance company said, look, they came in, it's your decision. It's always the company's decision, but we know these people and we're going to negotiate it down to 1.2 million. We know we can get these guys down from 5 to 1.2. So they already, like, the cyber insurance company had the playbook, right? So we're going to negotiate this down to 1.2 million. And oh, by the way, if you don't do that, we're only going to give you, even though their cyber insurance policy was actually for 5 million, we're only going to give you 1.2 million, and we think it's going to cost you like 8 million to restore all your systems and everything you have to do. So they almost felt like, and again, I'm not saying this is always true with cyber insurance, they almost felt like they had to pay, they had to go with what the cyber insurance company wanted to do to get their data back. So sure enough, the cyber insurance paid the 1.2 million. They got most of their data back. They still had some problems, and then they were able to restore the systems and go from there. But the requirements from the cyber insurance company, it plays into a lot of these scenarios for a lot of companies. The other thing I'll mention, I don't know if you saw the headline a few weeks ago, there was a company in the United Kingdom that had a big ransomware. They paid out millions of pounds, and then they didn't do anything, and 2 weeks later they got hit again, the exact same people. So it's like the guy, it's almost like your story of getting the 2 potatoes in the bag. I mean, it's like they paid the ransom, they got the keys back, they got their data back, but I don't know if they were, all went on vacation or what they did, but they weren't ready. Maybe they put together a plan for what we're going to do, a year from now, but they didn't have a year. I mean, they had, get on it when their data came back. They paid the ransom, and then guess what? They got hit again and had to pay twice.
That's a funny story.
All over the papers in the UK. You can read about it.
Yeah. So Dan, one interesting kind of takeaway from what you mentioned, and also the kind of problem which I faced. The reason why I decided to kind of break down the drill into 2 parts was because the team never did something like this before.
Yeah.
And we wanted some real outcome, and we wanted them to come prepared. And
Sure.
what you mentioned, something which I kind of noticed while you were telling it, was that when you do this exercise in one go, you expect everybody to come prepared with their plans. So I think that's a very important thing, that these crisis drills, in order to be successful, the teams need to have that right background beforehand. They need to come with some level of preparedness and planning, and not just get in, because that's not going to be a recipe for success. So back to this recipe for success, Dan, any of your suggestions in terms of do's and don'ts in order to
Sure.
make these tabletop exercises successful? One is like this preparation, right? So this is something very important. Any other thing which you suggest?
Yeah, let me just add one more quick thing to that. I have a couple here I can go over, but preparation, we always had read ahead materials. So it was like real life scenarios, people, or it could be like, here's what happened at this other company. Here's what happened at, a competitor of ours, or, here's what happened. Maybe you want to do it in the same industry, and or materials like, before you even started the exercise, you kind of gave the intelligence. But again, this may be not a real situation, but like, here's what's happening in the world, for an oil company, the price of oil has plummeted, yada, 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 kind of preparing people in advance for the scenario that's going to hit them on the day of the exercise. So yeah, I mean, definitely that should always be part of some preparation and making sure people who are coming in know what their role is going to be, know what their some background is. Another thing we did, so I start giving you some other tips. What often happens at these is they start throw curves at people. What I mean by that is, kind of like you can play cricket, but throw in U.S. baseball, curveball, change it up. So what do I mean by that? Like they would come in day one and say, you, and you, tap them on the shoulder. You're gone. Get up. Get out of here. Go stand in the corner of the room. You're an observer. You can't say anything. It's like, wait a minute. That's the CFO you just tapped on the shoulder. You can't. Yeah, but he's in Germany. So he's not able to be here right now. So, and what about that guy? Well, yeah, that's my chief security officer. He's on vacation at Disney World. So we're going to let him, so we're going to put him down in the basement, and you can call him on the phone, but he can't be in the room here. He can't look at any of the stuff, going on. So, that happens a lot. So, try and, that's one way you can throw them a curve, or you can, something they're not expecting. Because inevitably, whatever you plan, whatever you're thinking, whenever you think you're ready, you're never ready, right? Because it's never exactly like I remember during the blackout of 2003. People said, afterwards, I got interviewed by all these TV stations. Were you ready? Were you ready? And I'm like, well, we didn't have that exact scenario of like this blackout, but we did have a lot of the plans. We had just run a tabletop exercise. We had just gone through Y2K a few years earlier, and we had about 80% of it we were ready for. But 20% of it was different. 80% we were ready, and that was pretty good. So, but change it up. So throw curve balls, as we say in the U.S. That's another thing. I think you need to really, as you mentioned, another real tip is a lot of times people get through the exercise and they want to just kind of like say, okay, I'm done. See you next year. See you next January, right? Taking action items, like you said, and then having people report back. It may not mean you have to have the entire team, reassemble for part two, and that's great if you can. But it may be that you just have what we call, action items that people have to like report back on by email, or maybe the team comes back and says, we want everyone to do the, you assign who's responsible for those action items. You have to have a name next to the action items. These other people can participate. Bob, you can get together with, Sarah and Mary and Bill, but Bob is the person we're going to hold accountable, and we're going to look for you to come back and update our plan to include this scenario, that kind of a thing. So, making sure you do have actionable items, I think, is really important. I think one more thing I would mention is, ask people for feedback at the end. I talked about the hot wash in my example a few minutes ago. Whether you call it a hot wash, whether you call it feedback, maybe you do it in a survey. We do this with customer service all the time and other types of things like that. Is, what did you think was reasonable? What could we have done better next time? And you get some pretty sophisticated answers from some executives, around, it gets them thinking. It gets them thinking outside the box. It changes things up from their normal environment. I've even seen people say, and this is another little side tip, go to an offsite, go somewhere else, get people out of their normal environment. So, during an exercise, and sometimes the people are doing it all, this is hard with COVID because people are working from home, right? So, doing virtual exercises is really hard. But they would get people in the same room, and they would often do that as an offsite or get them to the emergency coordination center. If it's a tabletop, you may or may not be able to go to the actual place where you would be if it was a real emergency. You may, but you may not. But, getting people out of their normal environment so they're not like going back and checking their email all the time. Or, we had people who disrupted. They would pop in and pop out, pop in, pop out, and they were not really engaged. They weren't like freed up. Some people would say, turn your cell phone off. And you say, what a real emergency, wouldn't we be texting each other, whatever. But, if it's a tabletop exercise, it's the discussion, the comments are very important, and you want people to be focused. Just like if you go to someone, a friend or spouse, for dinner, you don't want them on the phone the whole time while you're having dinner with them, right? We all know that. That's not very polite, right? It's not very good etiquette. So you want people engaged, you want people participating, and you want them there. You don't want them kind of coming in, coming out the whole time.
Yeah, Dan, that's a great point that you mentioned. So I remember one of those, like, learning from failure cases kind of stuff. So I mean that this is not something which not part of my usual stuff that we do. In my normal day-to-day stuff, we are into red teaming kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
in a few cases where I had been part of the advisory board, etc., I had done some of these exercises. So I recall one of the cases where some of the folks got into the room late, around half an hour late. So they missed the complete context and the setting.
Yeah.
And then during the session, we did this curveball where they wanted to kind of revive everything from the backup. And we said that the backup is encrypted.
Yep.
The cloud backup is encrypted. And that kind of created a lot of frustration. And these guys had a lot of challenges and issues to kind of cope up with this scenario, and that created a lot of confusion in the room. So I think what you mentioned is something very important, that people should be completely dedicated. They shouldn't be moving in and out, and they should have the context. They should join the meeting on time and stuff like that. Else, an exercise like this can go in the can be a very futile one, and if a few people are not engaged and involved, that can actually kind of take away the seriousness of this exercise, right? So any other thing you want to add, Dan, in terms of any of these success factors, do's and don'ts, before we move to the next one?
I just would say one final thing, and that's, you want to be growing. The goal is to improve, and you're never going to be perfect. This is a journey. It's not like, some people come in and have observers. I know Homeland Security, they'll have people just sitting there taking notes and they'll grade you. You can do that. I know they have reasons, did you do this? Did you accomplish? What were your goals? The team that's putting together the exercise certainly should have goals and outcomes that they're looking for. And, you can do that. I know Homeland Security does that a lot. They grade people, what worked, what didn't work. But remember that every time you do this, it's different. It changes. The people are different. You think, well, we all did this and we were great, but yeah, that was a year ago. That was 2 years ago. Now the CFO is different. The CISO is different. The CIO is different. So you're doing that. Sometimes you do the same thing with a different group of people, because it may even be the same exercise. I would update it, hopefully, but you remember that the organization is always changing. The world is always changing. If we did an exercise today, Bikash, it'd be very different than what we would have done 1 year ago before COVID hit, so hard. And so the reality is that everything, it's a moving target. You're never done, but I would celebrate success when you accomplish something. Have a party, if you will. No, enjoy it. You accomplish something, move on. And know that you're going to constantly be hopefully improving. It's not like a destination, it's a journey. And so you want to constantly improve in your approach to dealing with cyber threats.
That's a very important thing that you mentioned. It's not a destination, it's a journey. So Dan, in 2021, what are some of the things which you think as cybersecurity professionals we should look out for, which could be some interesting technologies, which could be some interesting trends, anything that the cybersecurity professionals should look out for in 2021?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Every year I do a top 21 or top whatever the number is. This is 2021, so 21. Last year it was 20 for 2020. I do the top predictions from all the security vendors in the industry. So you go to Lorman on cybersecurity, LOHRMANN, Lorman on cybersecurity, and you'll see this list. I've done it annually for about a decade now. And it's not my predictions, but it's what all the top vendors are saying. So, certainly a lot of experts are pointing to ransomware getting, evolving, getting more complex, changing, where, a lot of times they're stealing the data before they encrypt it. So they're hitting you twice. And if you don't pay, they threaten to release your data. Ransomware is a big one. Working from home, Bikash, has changed so much. Threats are just coming in organizations in so many different ways. People a lot of times using home computer equipment, maybe home routers, even some of the technical difficulties you've had today. You see, it's challenging when people aren't in the office. So, looking at their whole digital transformation, which is really occurring at lightning speed. The good news is there's a lot of really positive things happening. The bad news is there's also more risks that are being introduced into business processes because people are working from home. So a lot of the vendors are pointing to different things, like they're saying your home network is like headquarters for the hackers. And some very entertaining examples in that blog that people can go to and read about. We can post the blog if people want to know that. But artificial intelligence is certainly, and machine learning is becoming more and more central. And it's being used against organizations. So you need to be thinking hard about, how are you going to automate a lot of your processes? That's a big area. And then one more I'll mention, movement to the cloud. I mean, so much is moving to cloud, cloud security, cloud platforms, and the cloud security is becoming so important. A lot of people say this in the US, hey, I'm moving all my data to the cloud. I'm moving all my processes to the cloud. Google does it better than we do, or Microsoft does it better than we do, or AWS, Amazon Web Services does it better than we do. So, but what they miss, Bikash, is that you're still responsible for that end-to-end security. Even if you've got an AWS server, maybe they've got a great data center, maybe they've got security practices, but your people are still administering that, or you're still running that business process, or you're still running that end-to-end security for your customers and your clients. So you can't just say, well, I'm just outsourcing it all to Microsoft or AWS. So really, cloud security is becoming even more important, and really something that organizations need to really take a look at. What is their processes? One word, a term that we use a lot in the U.S. is SASE, S-A-A-S, SASE, or S-A-S-E. Not sassy like S-A-S-S-Y in the U.S. It's like, it's S-A-S-E, SASE. Look it up, read about it. It's certainly a hot area for a lot of people.
SASE and zero trust.
Correct.
Right. So, yeah. So interestingly, what you mentioned, and I fully agree with you. The attack surface all of a sudden has changed so dramatically for organizations that today people actually don't know of all the assets they have. They don't know the attack surface, and it's continuously changing. Even the home router, the system which end user is using from home, these are all now part of the extended attack surface, right? Then you have the cloud, and teams are creating new cloud assets. And cloud, interestingly, scales everything. It scales security. It can also scale insecurity, both together. So I'm a big believer of cloud, and I believe that cloud in the long run is going to create a much more safer world if done right. And I am kind of very confident that we will do it right as an industry, because there is business in there. So if there is a business driver, it will get done, right? So, but in the interim, this time is very vulnerable, because a lot of people who are just moving to the cloud are not aware of the configurations, the way it should be done. A lot of people are not aware of MongoDB having the default kind of configuration is insecure. So like since we monitor the kind of overall internet, I recall, I guess there's around 500,000 open databases out there right now. Which is quite crazy. People just did not configure it right, and these are all just out there open. So these are some very interesting new challenges. But on top of it, I would love to probably add one thing, which is one of the biggest challenge which we as the industry face, is that when it comes to security, there are just too many things that we need. Every vendor is going to come and say, you know what, you need this, you need that, and none of this talks to each other. So there is a need for consolidation of cybersecurity. And how could that consolidation happen? It could happen probably in many ways, but one or a few interesting trends which are out there, which could probably shape the future. One is zero trust, which is in other words, is a kind of consolidation, right? I mean, you eliminate a lot of things and put everything into a single place. So zero trust, I believe, has got a very interesting future. I'm very curious to see how things pan out. Cloud definitely is another, because that's going to help in consolidation. So as an industry, that consolidation drive can happen in many ways, but there are these couple of very powerful kind of dynamics which are panning out right now. And last but not the least, I would definitely love to highlight the topic, which is response and recovery. In other words, right? It's not just about trying to protect, but it's also about having the right kind of response and recovery program in place, which can be done through many different approaches, which could be having the right kind of backups, having these crisis drills, and having the right kind of processes in place, having BCP-DR, etc., etc. Many of these may not be very costly. You don't need to go and buy that appliance and shiny new device, etc. These are more basic stuff, but that basic stuff is becoming very, very important. So to conclude, Dan, anything you want to add before we kind of wrap it up with the last question for today?
Your points are well taken, and I think the complexity. It's funny. I agree that so many organizations don't have they don't even use the tools they have, first of all, and they're always being asked to add more, or you're missing this, you're missing that. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. So simplifying the architecture, I agree with you on zero trust. It's a challenge, because I also think, play devil's advocate, the other thing, they've been talking about industry consolidation for years and years and years, and yet we see more and more startups all the time. So it just keeps growing, and I think there's been predictions that there's going to be a big industry consolidation coming, and as long as the stock market keeps going up, and as long as new companies keep getting bought, and if we have obviously a big stock market correction, I could flush out a lot of things and cause that consolidation. But I'm not sure 2021 is going to be the year we're going to see an industry
No,
consolidation.
it's not going to happen in 2021. But I guess that we are kind of gradually moving towards that. So
Okay.
SOAR was a movement towards consolidation.
I agree.
Zero Trust is a movement towards consolidation. Cloud as a general play is a movement through consolidation, because that kind of gives you this real estate to do the consolidation. Earlier, it was very hard, whereas cloud kind of creates an uniform playing ground, right? So what I mean to say is that the drivers are gradually kind of falling in place, and which is going to win in the long run, time will say.
Sure.
But the good thing is that I'm kind of seeing some of those drivers gradually falling in place. And you're absolutely right. It's probably we are a decade away or 5 years away. Sometimes things can happen faster or slower, but definitely I believe 5 to 10 years.
Yep, I agree with that.
So Dan, the last question. What are some of, I can see a lot of books behind you. So let me ask you, which are some of your favorite books and favorite podcasts?
Sure. So to start off, I just want to mention, we talked about this earlier. I brought my book, Virtual Integrity. You can all look at this. This is actually, there was actually, believe it or not, an Indian version that came out. So it was this version here, which actually brings together, we talked about it earlier, Bikash, it brings together kind of my faith and online life, so, the importance of protecting yourself in cyberspace, brings in cybersecurity and everything, but also brings in ethics and the importance of cyber ethics, brings in, kind of puts it to light, real meat on the bones around that. So those are some books I've read. I've been a part of a couple books, CIO Leadership for state and local governments, Emerging Trends and Best Practices. Another book I did a chapter in. I've done chapters in about 5 or 6 books, CIO Leadership for cities and counties, Emerging Trends and Best Practices. Again, all these are available at Amazon. You asked me about other books that I've read that I like. This one's by Bruce Schneier, Secret and Lies. He's got a number of great books that I read. A lot of the books behind me, as we were talking about earlier, are a wide variety of topics. My wife and I both grew up as children of pastors. So my father was a Lutheran pastor. My wife's father was a Presbyterian pastor in the Christian faith. And so we do a lot of reading on different topics around history, but also around our faith, but also around cybersecurity. So I love to read books. I'm always blogging and writing and podcasting, like with you. So I enjoy a lot of really great conversation with people like yourself. And so I really do try and read a lot if I possibly can. But encourage people to, on Twitter, I'm at govt, and I'm also on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to link with people. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll link with you.
Wonderful. Dan, thanks a lot. This had been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. So have a great day.
Thank you. So we missed kind of mentioning to the audience that you could post any questions out there. So Sheetal,
Yes, thank you so much, Dan and Bikash, for such an amazing discussion. I hope this discussion was actually very helpful and interesting to the people who have joined and attended. We have had few questions during your session. One of this question is, with SASE, when everything is centralized or consolidated versus the traditional defense in depth with various layers of technical controls, do you have any additional insights, thoughts, and guidance in this area, given the risk we have seen with the SolarWinds?
That's a 10-minute question by itself. Sure. I mean, there's a lot of things I could say. I mean, in the U.S., I try to explain SASE around. It is largely a move. Hearing a little bit of background, but it is largely a move. Kind of when we talk about cloud security, there was a big push around what we call CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers. So the real focus historically had been really how do you stop people from going to rogue websites? How do you, if everyone's sitting in the same building, if you will, how are you able to control that? But honestly, with SASE, people are all, no longer are people sitting in the same building anymore. Right now with COVID, everyone's sitting at home. They're, and the zero trust aspect comes into play in so many aspects of that. So you need to be able to verify and do identity management and really be able to control well who's connecting to what resources and how are they doing that. And SASE really helps attack that. I know we're short on time here, so I don't know how much further we can go on this, Bikash. Any comments?
No, I think that's great, Dan. And any other question, Sheetal, before we close? I know we are at the end of our time slot.
Yes. So before we wrap up this, there is this one question which keeps on popping a lot. People are asking, which was this website? If you can just help us again, that you mentioned throughout the conversation.
The website that for my blogs, you mean? The blogs? You're talking about that?
Or it could be
Yes.
NIST also, blog as well as the NIST. I mean, you can probably talk about both.
Sure. So the easiest way to get to it is just to go to Google and type in Lorman on cybersecurity or Dan Lohrmann. Type my name in, it'll pop right up. But my blogs, I'm at Government Technology Magazine. It's www.govtech.com. GOVTEC. govtech.com. Click on cybersecurity and it's got my blogs right there. I'm highlighted with Government Technology Magazine. Also, the NIST website is a computer security resource center, csrc.nist.gov. So csrc.nist.gov. Lots of resources there, lots of scenarios, lots of great documents you can look at.
Thank you so much, Dan, once again. And as we have already passed our time slot by 2-3 minutes, so we would be closing this session. And as for the audience, if you have any questions, we are all ears. You can write it to us at contact@csoplatform.com. We will be happy to connect you directly to Dan and Bikash. And you can also connect with Dan and Bikash on their social media. They are very active there. And thank you once again, Dan and Bikash, for such an amazing session. We will be closing this session.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Same to you.
And we really look forward to these amazing sessions in the future also.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.